I wonder if we want to take up that little, just before we turn to the audience for some prompts and questions, just because you've all had your own particular interest in the health and well-being of Indigenous communities, and it is, of course, in Australia in terms of microcosm of the global challenges that are out there. I guess I'd come back to some of the issues that we've already raised in discussion. Is it fair to be looking at some of the large-scale interventions that are happening at the moment? Some of them called the intervention, but interventions of many forms are in place to be using health, well-being data outcomes as a test for those in those contexts and those scenarios. I'm looking at you, Vivi, to start that discussion, but are they reasonable tests, if you like, of these critical social determinants that we're
tests of the interventions? No. They might be one outcome, but there are other... People think that health is the ultimate value. I don't think it is, because there are values that people are prepared to give up their health for. There are values that people are willing to give up their lives for. So it's fair to measure health as an outcome, but not at the cost of other things that are also fundamental to a sense of well-being and to a sense of dignity.
It's a good surrogate, though.
Well, are we measuring mental health too? Is it a good surrogate? It is important, but for as many people who will say that the interventions are of value, there are also people who feel undermined and insulted. So if that is an outcome, it would be my inclination to investigate that as an outcome.
Yeah, I think I agree with some of what you're saying. Amartya Sen, I quoted before, I think described development as freedom, and freedom as the freedom for people to choose the good life as they name it. And I think that's very important when you're factoring in Indigenous issues around identity and land and remoteness and culture. And however, having said that, and I also agree about the surrogate measure, I think all of us here say if women and children are suffering extraordinarily, their human rights being violated, the risk of an intervention to protect those rights has got to be at least arguably defended. However, when the intervention was based essentially on race, suspension of the Racial Discrimination Act, if the intervention had been based on poverty and remoteness rather than simply race, I think the fact that particularly Aboriginal men felt we are now just the worst scapegoated group, violent, paedophiles, drunkards, that caricature doesn't actually start to move you from a position of being able to take responsibility and move in the right sort of direction. So, intervention, we now know, top down, for a short time, because it's called an emergency, has to end, and it has to move from grassroots up. Ownership, sustainability, this is about our lives. That balance and pendulum swing, I'm not sure we've totally got right. I don't pretend to know what these answers are, but at least if you're having an emergency intervention, I think health's not a bad surrogate to say, have we achieved anything?
Just one more issue to raise, I guess, before we ask the audience to contribute, but given I flagged it in the introduction, but we are in a time of unprecedented natural disasters happening globally in a collective conscious, locally, nationally, globally. Are the lessons there for the enormous global health challenges we're confronting in both from a prevention and a response point of view that we can be learning, again in very different contexts in which they're occurring, but at the very least, and you've certainly have first-hand experiences of that collective goodwill that I think everyone wants to feel they can hang on to in some way, but inevitably starts to be diluted and wither post the disaster. But is there some lessons there that we can learn for a collective response to these health challenges?
In terms of specific issues, such as viruses which might be entering Australia, new viruses, more cases of dengue, hemorrhagic fever, that sort of thing.
And then broadly health and well-being, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the jury's out on whether, say, global warming is going to bring more malaria or bring malaria to Australia or bring more dengue fever to Australia or whatever. I think all those things are possible, but I think natural disasters, by and large, affect many things, but the economy has to pay to fix it up. So there must be, I think, unless there's some sort of stimulus because the building industry gets more work, but overall there must be less, I think, I'm not an economist, there must be less productivity. The thing that got some of the serious diseases out of Australia, such as malaria, was nothing more than good economic growth. So Cairns used to be the malaria centre of Australia. Outbreaks up there 100 years ago in northern Queensland, half of the population in local communities would die of malaria. It wasn't a malaria vaccine because we haven't got one that got rid of malaria in Australia. It was economic growth. So as I see it, this spate of natural disasters, I mean, if these things continue at an accelerated pace, I think the greater risk for the health in terms of specific agents, such as viruses and that sort of thing, is because of economic degradation. But I think perhaps a more pressing issue will be effects on mental health, for example. But in my own field, that's how I would see the threat to infectious agents coming through that way.
I am very pessimistic about this. I, in my heart of hearts, believe that in 50 years' time, the world is going to be a very different place. And my vision is that humans will be wiped off the face of the earth, and that will be a good thing. But in the meantime, one of the areas that I work in, surprisingly, is obesity. And what that tells me, just in that own field, in that particular field, for our own self-interest, we seem unable to take any act as a government beyond looking at social awareness programs, beyond saying to people, this is what a good diet consists of, and don't eat too much. But for me, obesity is a symptom of an overconsumptive society, and what we really need to do is to figure out ways that people can buy less and buy less rubbish. And there are actually ways that this could be achieved if there was any will to do so. But there is no will to do so at all. So in terms of environment and disasters, I actually see it getting worse. We know what we need to do, we just don't seem to be able to do it. And that is a dreadful comment on us as a community.
I think we know how to do it. I think the government doesn't help us do it. I mean, you're talking about obesity, for example. I mean, that's one of the greatest challenges today, I think, in terms of public health. But so was cigarette smoking 50 years or 30 years ago, and you know, we are now the lowest smoking country in the world.
The tactics that were used for cigarette smoking will not work for obesity. And you can see in the health literature people drawing lessons from tobacco and wanting to apply them to obesity, so that the suggestions that are being made are marketing less, and boy, we're very far away from that. Taxing junk food, that in the Henry Tax Review that was rejected, but people still think that might be of assistance. And then there are a range of other suggestions, bariatric surgery, drugs, better food labelling. There are actually a myriad more potential interventions that we could introduce, everything from restructuring our supermarkets so that we don't have to pass by all the junk food, and they could put all the sort of basics in one place. Supermarkets are actually structured so that you have to pass by everything in order to get the things that you want. I'd like to see plain packaging for junk food, but the government won't go anywhere near that.
That's my point, though, Bibi, is that, I mean, I think we know, well, we think we know some of the things that can be done, but nothing's being done in terms of
Can I
obesity.
jump in here and say, we have this strange debate going on now between a loss of confidence in anything government does or the charge it's nanny state. It's social engineering. Right at the very time we have, I think, some of the most urgent challenges before us that can only be addressed with government intervention. So we have this paralysis of confidence. Climate change is a classic example. I'm not a scientist, but World Vision work in over 100 countries, it's the same anecdotes coming over and over again. We always got 2 crops in a season, now we're only getting 1. Something's changed. There wasn't the number of storms and cyclones. The birds always arrived at this time of year. That's how we knew how to plant our seed. Those birds now arrive 6 weeks late. We have seen changes that are profound. And in terms of our work, we're shifting from being a development agency that does a bit of humanitarian relief with the onset of so many disasters to becoming a relief humanitarian organisation that does a bit of development. So it's profoundly challenging. And yet in Australia, the 2 words climate change are 2 words you're almost, you dare not speak their name. You know, it's like you've suddenly become a politically correct, I don't know what. So this loss of confidence, and it's a loss of confidence that goes to what has driven human history. I think Bibi might have made the point before. Humans in every generation have seen parents make incredible sacrifices at huge cost to their own well-being and health and lifestyle, just so their kids might have a better life and a better chance. That's actually what drives human history. Our parents did it. I fear that with climate change, our baby booming generation has become the first not prepared to make that sacrifice, to say, well, not really our problem, and we're not going to have our electricity bills go up or the evidence out. So to answer your question, I think there's been lots of Lancet surveys saying climate change and health is a really potent mix. I think it is a challenge.